Well, there we go. Recording has begun. It is Find Out Friday. This is the delightful moment in time where we all get to sit down with the big brains at Concrete and ask questions of how does that work and why. So this week, Evan, I believe you have a question for Andrew. Go for it.
Yeah, this week I thought it would be helpful for kind of developers in the community. A lot of the topics we've covered up to this point have been kind of more kind of out in the abstract a little bit, but just bringing it back to the old MVC, talking about views and controllers and kind of how those work in Concrete in some of the more advanced applications of that as well. So that was basically kind of what I wanted to cover on this Friday, if that works for you, Andrew.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Sure. Yeah, so before I screen share, in general, a general definition of controllers and views as we think of them in Concrete is a view is kind of the code that generates the HTML that a user might see in a browser at some point. So it's not just HTML because views are PHP files, so they themselves have PHP logic and then they can get compiled down to HTML that the browser sees. But they are generally the front end component, and they might in themselves include JavaScript or an entire web application as well, but they are the front end aspect of different Concrete interfaces. And by contrast, the controller is the back end piece. So logic that runs in PHP as well that sends data into a view. And this is pretty old school sort of PHP framework stuff, not the very oldest of old school PHP, which was just intermingling code and front-end logic, however you feel. This is a little bit more structured, but definitely not quite as tightly structured as sort of more, the de rigueur of web applications these days. But you can build web applications that are, pretty highly specialized with this model as well, and also power lots of Concrete stuff as well. So examples of controllers and views in Concrete. I'll just start sharing my screen. If I can figure out how to do that. Yeah, so the easiest or sort of the introduction to views and controllers that many Concrete developers get are blocks. So any piece of editable content in a Concrete site is a block type, and blocks have controllers and views. So controller.php within your block type directory, that is a controller file. It runs methods at different points in the block's rendering lifecycle, and then sends data into the corresponding view template. So when you're viewing a block here, the view method in your block's controller gets run. It sends data into the view.php, and same with add and edit. And this is kind of, for a developer in a Concrete site, it's pretty likely that if they are an active developer to a site and they are doing more than just tweaking a theme in a little bit, in a minor capacity, they'll probably be working on custom block types pretty soon if they do any kind of real Concrete development work. And that's sort of the first place that we experience views and controllers. But there are more than just views and controllers in block types. There are also what we call single pages. Single pages are pages in your Concrete site that are only meant to live at one spot. So like a good example might be, the sitemap page. This is an administrative interface. It's got a JavaScript component here, but it's also got this kind of stuff up here. It's got a title, etc. It lives within the dashboard theme. And you might find like you're never going to want to add a second dashboard page, a sitemap page to your site. Or I mean, never say never, I guess. But it's pretty unlikely. And similarly, like all of these system and settings pages, like, do you really need to be able to see the bookmark icons page somewhere in an ad interface? No, you have it added once as part of your Concrete site. But what's cool about it is all these pages in the dashboard are actual pages in your Concrete site, which you can see from within your the sitemap. So if you actually show system pages, you'll see that all of these show up because they are in fact page records in your Concrete site. but they're not pages of a certain type that you yourself can add. They are called single pages because they get added by code, in this case through installation or upgrading your Concrete site. And then they exist at that one spot, and you can't add it again unless you run some custom code. But what's cool about these is they also are single pages are also made up of views and controllers. So if you look into your Concrete directory, you can go deep into controllers, single page. You'll find it based off the tree that which mirrors the sitemap as well. You'll see here's our system, and then we can find our bookmark icons. I think they're in basics. Icons.php. So you see here is an example of a dashboard single page controller, and it's structured pretty similarly to view control or block view controllers. So we have it has to be named a certain way, and you have to use the proper namespace that corresponds to its spot in the both in the sitemap tree as well as in the folder file system. And so here's the view method, which gets run automatically.
I think we're gonna need the code. We can't see it. We can only see the sitemap.
Oh, did I only? I only shared one thing. Wow, exciting. Why they didn't make that the default, I do not know. How's that?
There we go. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and so here you can see that the icons controller is there's a view method defined here, and this method automatically runs whenever the icons dashboard page is rendered. And so it does a bunch of custom logic. It's sort of up to developers what they put in here. It's totally dependent on the sort of business case of this page. Here we're retrieving a bunch of stuff from config. What this does isn't really that important so far as it affects this discussion, but here we are. Here we're retrieving information from the configuration, and we're using the set method, which is basically just a way of making some piece of data available to the template. So all this stuff is scoped. So everything here is scoped within the view method, and then if you didn't do anything with it, it would just be information that doesn't get used. But by using the set method, a variable named favicon will automatically be present in the corresponding single page dashboard view template for this. So if we scroll down our Concrete file system here, you can see there is a corresponding view page for the icon section here. If we open that up, you can see this is what is rendered within the dashboard theme for this single page. And I think that's one thing that Concrete does really well, and I think it was a good decision that we made many years ago, was all of the administrative interfaces are really built using the same tools that any site developer can use for their own custom sites. Most site developers aren't going to be building their own single pages because usually with sites, you're building pages that are reused. They might have functional components to them, but those might be blocks. You don't necessarily need single pages when you're doing custom development work on your site, or not as much as you might need custom block types. But the option is there for developers on the front end, just like it is in the dashboard. And the dashboard is actually its own theme, just like these single pages are usable in the front end and the back end. So here is an example of the form that is part of this single page when you go to the bookmark icons single page here. And so that gets rendered within your dashboard theme, and that's how this works. And so when you hit the save method here, you can see there's an action method that calls update icons. Well, what that's doing is it is generating a special string in the form that will post back to the current controller, wherever that may be. You don't have to know what that is or care about defining that in this template. All you have to say when you're building a template, if you want to post back to the back end to do something, you just run view action. And then if we go back in here, update icons, we've just defined an update icons method. And so when that form is submitted, this method will run. And then you can return JSON, you can redirect the page on completion. You have a lot of flexibility for what you want to do. But that communication in two ways, downward and upward, is pretty vital to how controllers and views function. And beyond that, there's other examples of controllers and views in an even more sort of advanced use case. I just installed a custom add-on that I've been working with lately. It adds some capabilities to boards that the core that make it easier to work with boards in a more for sites that have a large quantity of boards. The built-in tools kind of make it a little bit more difficult to publish rules to a vast quantity of boards, and so we've added a custom add-on that will make it easier for those sites that have just massive amounts of boards that they need to work with. And so what we have here is this bulk scheduler page as part of a custom package. And I don't really need to talk about boards here. I really just wanted to bring it up because it has some pretty good encapsulated examples of more advanced controllers and views. So here, for example, we add a custom dashboard page that that shows all the different board scheduling rules in your site. Again, if this doesn't mean anything to you because you don't use the boards feature in version 9, that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to bring it up because it uses some controllers and views. So here, when we click on advanced and we have this advanced search, we actually pop open a dialog. And what's happening there is it is running a custom dialog controller. And so what happens is we use the built-in Concrete modal functionality to call a specific route in the backend, and that content will get populated into this dialog, and the dialog controller is here. And so we've got advanced search, and much like the single page controller, the dialog controller has to be present in the particular spot. Since it's part of a package, it has to have this package as part of it. It's got some methods that, and since this is actually extending here. Wanted to find where that thing is. Okay. So as you can see here, we are extending a custom class a built-in core class in the back end called Concrete Controller Backend User Interface. And what this class does is it basically makes it so you can define custom interfaces that aren't single pages. They're not as big as a single page or a block type. They're just sort of ephemeral pieces, not ephemeral, they're sort of piecemeal modular systems for showing dialogues, panels, that kind of stuff that doesn't have to have like a front-end component to it or persistent component to it in the database, but can be used to show different user interfaces to people. So when you click on this, it runs this method that renders, where is it? It renders this advanced search component. And then since that extends this advanced search user interface, we can then define a can access method here, which will determine, hey, what user can even view this thing? So what's happening here behind the scenes when you click on this link is it's firing off a request to your server and says, hey, give me the dialog content for the board's advanced search. And then the can access method tells you, allows you to check whether the currently logged in user has the ability to look at that, because we only want people who can view the dashboard rules page to be able to do that. And then similarly, the backend controller also has the ability to define what is called a view path. And so this is sort of the third major controller and view system beyond blocks and single pages. There are just sort of free-floating controllers and views. And these make up kind of the vast majority of Concrete's user interface. So they're not single pages, they're not blocks, but they're basically all these dialogues, there, when you go into the sitemap and you say, hey, I want to change the caching settings here, that is a dialog controller in Vue. If you want to go to the front end of your site and say, I want to change the location here, that's not a dialog because it's sort of, it's obviously not a dialog. We call that a panel, or in this case, a detail panel. Again, these are all controllers and views, and they all kind of operate in the same way, where you define which users or groups can access a particular thing, and define where the corresponding view template is located. And so in the case of my advanced search here, I have my board's advanced search over here, which then also has a corresponding view found in the views folder, or views. Oh, actually, this is a little bit more exotic than that, because the core actually defines this view. But I'll use a different example from the same package. For example, here, when I have something like this, and I want to delete a list here, when I click this, I get this, are you sure you want to delete this list of boards? Then this is kind of loaded up in the same way. We have a controller, we have a corresponding view file. And, if you look within the controllers directory of the core, you'll see it's sort of a map of all of Concrete's functionality, and maybe it'll become more clear the types of just how wide a swath of Concrete's functionality is encompassed by this, because here we've had single page controllers like we already talked about, but now you can see if we go into dialog, you can see just tons of controllers. So area edit design, like all of that stuff is in here. Anytime you do anything with page bulk stuff, or you want to edit the attributes, all of these are controllers. And then if we go into views, we'll have a very similar level of functionality, because the default is to have one controller per one view and to kind of link them back up together. And so hopefully it's becoming pretty clear quickly that this is the way that a large part of Concrete is built, but it is architected in such a way that developers can use this system for all of their stuff. And indeed, if we didn't have it, it'd be a lot harder to build some of the stuff that we build for our clients. So that's a lot of talking. It probably makes sense to ask some questions or cover some things that I may have missed, or Corbin, I'm sure, has thoughts also on things that I may have missed, because I'm sure I didn't cover kind of a lightning round.
Yeah, no, it's definitely helpful for me to just see all the different applications, where they're implemented. Yeah, I'll open up the floor here. Corbin, do you have any questions? Any lightning round flashes?
He may not have any questions, but he might.
All right, any comments?
Fill in the blanks that I obviously. Yeah.
No, I think touching on how views can or controllers can have different views rather than just like one-to-one is wise. I think maybe talking a little bit about how assets are tied to views and controllers and how sets flow in might be good. But yeah, no, I think you covered it pretty well.
Nice. Yeah. So if you're not familiar, assets are I don't have a good example of multiple views, but I do know that our routing system allows you to return a view, and you can kind of there's a get view object method that a controller defines, and a lot of times controllers won't have this in there because it's being defined at a level higher. So if you extend the basic controller class, you won't have to worry about that. You'll have to define a view path, which sort of just usually is sort of the same path as what you have, what has already been chosen, where you've already placed your controller, but it doesn't have to be. But that path is fed to a get view object method, but there's nothing stopping you from implementing your own object. And perhaps like returning a view object with a different view path based off of like request variables or something like that. So that's definitely possible. I can't think of any example off the top of my head, but I know we've done it. Assets are interesting because if you're not familiar with Concrete's asset system, it's a way to define sort of JavaScript and CSS and either things you bundle and include with your packages or themes, or external assets. Assets in this case, yeah, it does mean JavaScript and CSS pretty specifically and exclusively. So what you might do is you might, it's actually not a terrible idea. So I can show an example of that in the context of controllers, I think, because here's an example. So we have this register assets in this custom class that I was or this custom package that I was just showing off. And what it does here is it basically just loads this from config. So if we look at the config, it'll become more clear what we're talking about here. We're defining an asset called bulk board scheduler backend. And what that basically means is we call it bulk board scheduler, you can call it anything. And then we call it backend because this asset is useful in the context of the dashboard. So again, this add-on only has a backend component, so it's a little bit redundant, but it's just a convention I've started adopting. Some add-ons impact both the backend and the front end, like they might have assets they need to use for their dashboard pages, so those are backend assets, but they might also be, adding assets to the front end to show a banner ad or something like that, and those are front end assets. Again, you can name this stuff whatever you want. It's just sort of a convention that I've adopted. And then we're just registering the fact that a backend.js file exists and the backend.css file exists. All that basically is a custom component that does this stuff here. Again, this is totally custom stuff. Doesn't really, this could be anything, but this could be any JavaScript. But the important point is that we are registering that JavaScript as an asset called bulk board scheduler backend. And then you can see us using that in our backend controller here. So here is a single page. This is the custom single page that you see here. And here we use the require asset method for its schedule. And all that does takes insert and job that we have read this asset namespace in the page request and some components. I think as we're with regards to in terms of dialogues is or in terms of controllers and views, and one thing that I think is pretty cool is that this, you might ask yourself, does this only work in sort of entire browser level communication? So like this scheduler is a single page, which means it controls the entirety of this rendering space. And the single page is part of a page template in the dashboard that happens to the header and the footer of the site. So does this work in the single page, but in the dialog? Like, can I use require asset and something comes in halfway through the page? Like if I go into rules, if advanced, that may a request to return sort of partial HTML and render it in the dialog. Well, how is that going to work? That assets, right? Because it's its own separate request in the page footer have already loaded. Well, actually, Concrete take care of that, and so require asset. If you run it within the context of like a control for a dialog, it will take care of figuring assets you're requiring, and it will actually output them top and the bottom using script asset loaders. It'll actually append them to the header and the footer of your page and load JavaScript and CSS that way. Long-winded way of saying you're using control in the context of like a dialog or something that loads after the fact, it can still the CSS and JavaScript on the page. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay.
Cool. Any other lightning round questions or comments?
None from me.
Awesome.
Awesome, guys. Well, there you go. I hope that was illuminating, and we have all found out a little bit more about how to build things with concrete. Thanks so much, everybody. See you again next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.